All right, and we are on the air. Hey everybody, it's welcome to today's lore segment. We've taken over for the dev team since they're all missing. A lot of people are missing, so they let us get on camera this time. I'm lead writer Doug Seacat.
And I'm senior art director Mike Vaillancourt.
Mike's going to be subbing in for Matt Getz on this occasion, although I won't be making him pretend to be a writer.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about the Order of the Golden Crucible and the Crucible Guard, our upcoming new faction, and kind of their background, since there's a lot of confusing elements there that are easy to misunderstand. And,
Absolutely.
And we're going to get into some of the concept art and talking about how some of the art got developed. But there's plenty to do, but we'll also be opening it up to some questions from the audience. If you have anything you want to throw out there, we'll see if we can answer them for you. But we'll also, once I run out of steam talking about the Order of the Golden Crucible, we'll also open it up to just some general Q&A. So anyway, I guess we should just dive on in there.
Let's do this.
Let's do this. So the Order of the Golden Crucible, if you don't know, is kind of one of our oldest arcane orders in the Iron Kingdoms. We've set it up to where they basically kind of came into existence at the early days when humanity got magic. They were there right back when the Orgoth were taking over and terrorizing everybody. And,
as they do.
Yeah, and when the rebellion got kicked off, the first group of arcane people, the first wizards, were quickly exterminated. So the Orgoth stamped them out as quickly as they could. And so the Order of the Golden Crucible kind of evolved out of the survivors of sort of the first purge. There was a group called the Circle of the Oath that was sort of our first mystical, wizards, basically. Huh. And the idea is that a guy named Sebastian Kerwin, who was a member of the Circle of the Oath, he created Mechanica. So a lot of the stuff that we are dealing with in today's setting, all the warjacks, all the Mechanica, all of that goes back to the first rebellion efforts where they knew they needed some weapons to deal with these crazy mad Vikings from across the ocean that had taken over the entire continent. So
yeah, we should have probably grabbed that longboat art, actually.
Oh yeah, that would have been a good one. But so the idea is, Orgoth came in, stamped out all of the brainiacs who were trying to figure out how to make Mechanica. They ran off to Lael, created the Order of the Golden Crucible as almost like a pool of survivors that were trying to hold on to that knowledge, try to retain that spark of the rebellion, try to come up with weapons that they could employ against the Orgoth. And one of the first things that they came up with was the firearm. And so, it was one of the first useful things they came up with, I should say. I'm sure they were mixing lots of potions and, making other random stuff.
Lots of paper packed ammo.
Yeah, lots of mixing and stirring. But one of the ideas is that, I always imagined that the Orgoth kind of weren't too impressed by alchemists at first. It was one of the reasons why you could hide as an alchemist. They weren't going to immediately come gunning for him because they weren't impressed by it.
It's because they're monsters.
Yeah, they have all this nasty necromancy and horrible magic that they can light people on fire with, and they're like, what are you going to do with that beaker?
Yeah, we're 7 to 8 feet tall. Yeah, we'll smash you.
What are you going to do? And so, like I said, the firearm was kind of one of the first things that they really came up with that worked. They're like, okay, we've got this tube, can put some bullets in it, launch that at high velocity. Yeah, now we got range. They're always running up on us with those swords. Let's shoot them in the face.
Yep.
And so that's kind of one of the first sort of rebellion efforts. Let's get some guns into the rebels' hands. And so the Order of the Golden Crucible is very proud of those early days of kind of helping get the rebellion kicked off. Now, I will say the Army of Thunder, which is what we called the first rifle army, they did get squashed. So the Orgoth was really good at stamping out rebellion groups.
Real good.
They got squished pretty good. But they shot a lot of Orgoth in the meanwhile. They left their mark, so much so that the Orgoth even snagged some guns for themselves. So then you get some guns on both sides as we headed into the later rebellion. Yeah, so you get your Vikings who now also have rifles, which is always a scary thing. So that's kind of how they got their start. Once the Orgoth got booted out, though, they kind of underwent a transition. They tend to think of themselves back as these sort of noble alchemists that fought against the rebellion, but pretty quickly they became kind of a mercantile guild. Like one of the ideas is everybody liked the firearms and wanted them, and so there was like this thriving market to make ammunition for your firearms. And so the way we kind of set up the Order of the Golden Crucible through a lot of the history of the Iron Kingdoms is they're the ones who were selling guns commercially. They're the ones that were selling the ammunition. They lost kind of their monopoly pretty early along.
So they were the early arms dealers?
Yeah, they're basically the early arms dealers.
Okay.
And it didn't take too long before they weren't able to keep it secret. Like, it's the kind of thing that other people started to do, but they managed to kind of make a niche for themselves as making the best ammo. It's like, okay, you could get that crappy ammo from someone else. We've got the good stuff. And so, the Grey Lord's Covenant is actually a number of the people that started the Grey Lord's Covenant might have started as members of the Order of the Golden Crucible or the Fraternal Order, who decided they wanted to just help the motherland and not everybody else, and so they started their own organization. But some of those people had undergone some training with the Order of the Golden Crucible or some of the other wizard orders. And so at that point you kind of get this fractionalization. But it's important to kind of bear in mind that even though the Order of the Golden Crucible was founded in Lael, and we kind of think of it as this Laelese organization, it existed all over the Iron Kingdoms. There were branches in Signar, branches in Ord. So it's like anywhere that you wanted to set up a commercial shop to mix stuff in beakers and become an alchemist, you would want to be a member of the Order of the Golden Crucible.
Yep.
You get like that stamp, on your goods. It's like, this is the mark of quality.
This is the real stuff. This isn't your generic.
Yeah, none of that generic low price blasting powder.
Yeah, your buddy at the corner mixed it up, and it's not quite as reliable as
maybe
it should
it doesn't
be.
work all the time. Every fifth bullet, maybe it doesn't work.
60% of the time it works every time.
Yeah, 60% of the time it works every time.
Bad odds.
So anyway, one of the things that happened as an extension of that, I think, like if you look kind of at the organization and the imminent rise of the Crucible Guard, is it probably started to become kind of a bummer to be working at the Order of the Golden Crucible if you weren't into making blasting powder. Like, let's say you want to make crazy rockets, or you want to make supersized cannons, or like some kind of tank-like railless interceptor. Like maybe you have other ideas other than blasting powder. But I always imagine that, like, since most of their money came from blasting powder, there was always a pressure to do that.
Make more.
Make more. It's like I imagined it like the Dunkin' Donuts, like making the donuts in the morning. You've got your Order of the Golden Crucible guy who's got to make the powder.
They got paninis now, man.
But you got to make the powder every day. You got your powder queue. They're like, they don't care about the weird serum that you're making that will turn you into a berserk, creature on the battlefield. They're like, well, where's the blasting powder?
Yeah, well, other people kind of wanted to, Hulk out.
Yeah, exactly. And
I like baning out. I mean, that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Turn into a rage monster for a few minutes and
who doesn't
go back
want
to
turn
normal.
into a rage monster now and again? But so the idea is that, most people didn't necessarily like when they got their headquarters invaded, but I think, to some degree it almost worked in their favor.
Yeah.
It's like, it's one of those things where you have a little bit of pain early along, get something good out of it down the road. So in the last few years, what we've seen is kind of a real change and transformation of the Order of the Golden Crucible and the Crucible Guard. It used to be that the Crucible Guard were basically just the soldiers that were looking after the alchemists. Like they're basically like the muscle.
Yep.
So you've got your alchemists that are making the cool stuff, and then you have your muscle to protect them. And since they're shipping these valuable goods across the kingdom, you need to have people that are going to protect that. And so
it doesn't even matter where you go. The second you leave the borders, you're hosed.
Yeah,
so.
and we know the Iron Kingdom is a terrible place. Lots of horrible things
I don't
outside
want to
of
live
every
there.
city. Lots of stuff wants to murder you. So the Crucible Guard served a really important role, but they weren't like a full army. Like we're seeing them sort of transform into as they become a real faction.
Yeah.
But then what happened is Khador decided to invade Lael and take over the whole place. And We have a little question here. Is the Order of the Golden Crucible a true monopoly, or are their products more of a brand? Yeah, they're definitely more of a brand. Like I was talking about, the idea is they might have once had a monopoly, but then it kind of became strained as time went on.
Well, I mean, they even they created their own symbol, so they've got branding.
Yeah, they've got their actual branding. But the idea is that like there might have been a period there, like shortly after the rebellion, where the Order of the Golden Crucible was it. Like they're the ones you had to go to. But pretty soon the major kingdoms are like, we're not going to be going to some private company to get bullets for our soldiers. So pretty soon you have the governments at least being like, okay, we're going to make our own ammunition. But for a long time, the Golden Crucible kind of held a monopoly over the commercial sale of blasting powder. So you're a mercenary, you're just a guy who owns a shop, you're just a pistolier in Lael who duels for the nobles. If you're going to be getting your ammunition, you need to go to the Order of the Golden Crucible, or if you're not, you're probably getting a really inferior product. And one of the big consequences of Lael getting invaded and the headquarters getting taken over by Khador is it kind of broke that monopoly even more. So that's when you sort of see that stranglehold they had on ammunition getting shattered. And one of the things that we did in the setting as kind of a result of that is it gave us an excuse to make ammunition cheaper. So
good.
For a long time, like any of the old-time RPG players will know, we had firearm ammunition ridiculously expensive. Like, each time you fire a bullet, that's like a week's salary. Or,
and that's not super range effective either.
Yeah, exactly. And so instead of eating or feeding your family, you're shooting a bullet, which isn't necessarily the best way to go. And so what we had is after the headquarters, the Thunderhead Fortress, got taken out, then the order itself kind of fractured. You had these sort of regional headquarters in the different kingdoms that were trying to make a buck, and you start to actually have some competition between one group and another, and the prices dropped way down. So it kind of gave us an excuse to let both ammunition become cheaper, but also to have more guns.
Probably ticked off those guys who were selling throwing knives. It
cuts into the throwing knife market.
Cutting into my business.
Yeah, or the crossbow market.
The Thunderhead Fortress is probably the coolest looking building in the Iron Kingdom.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah,
Mike,
sure.
You were involved in creating the art for that. This showed up in Fire and Forge.
Quarter 2?
I think it's 3 in issue number 3.
Yeah, it was either Prime 2 or 3. I can't remember. It all kind of.
I'm pretty sure it's 3. Yeah.
Yeah, it all kind of blends together. So when we were doing this, the typical process for every illustration is I'll go out on the internet and I'll find a whole bunch of reference that I think is appropriate for what we're going for architecture.
Right.
So of course in this case, the very first thing that I looked at was Notre Dame.
Right.
Just because.
Yeah, and we talked about that, like trying to get like a little bit of that. We wanted like half factory, half cathedral kind of feel. It's a fortress. It's also like almost like a sacred space to the Laelese. Like this is where the firearm was invented.
Yeah, bowed down to the to the gunpowder.
The church of the pistol. But yeah, I think that piece turned out great. I guess I should talk a little bit about the Thunderhead. One of the conceits, which is kind of funny in retrospect, is that the Laren, which is where the Thunderhead Fortress exists, is one of the most fortified, difficult to besiege places in our setting, despite the fact that it's changed hands a couple times recently.
Yeah, slightly contested.
But the way that's all gone down hasn't been through force of arms. Like nobody's actually besieged Laren and taken it over that way. What we showed in the Laelese War was betrayal from the inside. Like there was actually basically the Khadorans had been kind of sweeping across Lael. They had already kind of reached the river. They specifically slaughtered all the people at Riversmet to freak out the Order of the Golden Crucible that was being a real thorn in their sides. And so you have this situation where you have this impossible to besiege city, but you make the people inside there know that the Khadorans are coming.
Well, it was like that the piece we had done for Kings, Nations, and Gods, where it's that river checkpoint.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it's like, there's nowhere you can hide. They're going to stop you. They are going to inspect your goods, and if you are caught, there are dire consequences.
Right. So we have basically this Khadoran army segment that kind of rolls up outside of Laren, but like we actually featured this as a story in that same No Quarter Prime #3 where the Thunderhead art shows up. Like a small army shows up outside of Laren, and the people inside Laren are looking out at it and going, "That's not a big enough army.
Nah.
Like they can't take our city." but the people inside are nervous because they're like, "You heard what happened to Riversmet? Like they slaughtered everybody. Like they let the Doom Reavers run through the streets, like just killing everybody."
Yes, became rage monsters.
And Ersk did that on purpose, even though it was a harsh thing to do. But he knew that this was a city that if he was going to send Khadoran lives against, he would have to lose ridiculous numbers of people to take them out. So it's almost like a little psychological warfare. Slaughter the people that were left in Riversmet and make the people in Laren nervous. And so what happened is one of the senior alchemists in Laren decided to open the gates. Like he decided to open a secret passage basically to the Grey Lords. So you can imagine most of the senior members of the Order of the Golden Crucible and the Crucible Guard are kind of gearing up for a fight. They're ready to dig in. They know they can last a long time. They've got good food supplies, and then all of a sudden, there's Grey Lords in your chamber because this guy let him in the back door.
Yep, and game over.
And so that's kind of how we had the first takeover of Laren happen, and we'll get into the second one a little bit too. But the second time it was taken over, basically Severius pulled some Severius Protectorate nonsense with kind of he found out that a couple of the Grey Lords in charge had been raised as Menites, and arranged through some spies to get access to them, and kind of put the religious whammy on them, and it was like do you want to spend all of eternity tormented in Urkane? Maybe you should think about your roots as a Menite. Maybe you should open the gates. And so that's how the Northern Crusade took over Laren. Once again, there wasn't a big battle. Just a couple of people opened the gates, let everybody in.
And then I can kill you with my god.
Well, I was going to say, and then the next thing you know, you've got commandos going door to door and kicking them open and killing people with flamethrowers.
Yeah, exactly. And so this piece of art that I think's up right now is what it was like if you were a member of the Order of Golden Crucible still in Laren when the Northern Crusade is there, where all of a sudden, you're still doing the same job that you used to do, but there's...
but now you have armed guards standing directly behind you.
There's some Temple Flame
just
Guard
keep working. Everything's fine. Don't worry about it.
And Severius kind of took the place over, and kind of the Thunderhead became Severius's pad. That was his throne room. That's where he was hanging out.
That's a big throne room.
So all of a sudden, there's a lot more menafixes everywhere, and you've got new people to answer to. But one of the ideas is that when the Grey Lords were there before the Northern Crusade got there, the Grey Lords plundered everything. So it's like they went through every hallway, grabbing all the beakers, all the, as much of the powder as they could.
I think that answers that question.
Yeah. That's right. Grom Realfist says, how many golden crucible secrets did the Grey Lords steal during the occupation? Conversely, the same, but with the Protectorate. I'd say the Grey Lords definitely got more. For the Protectorate, it was much more of a cool building that they got to grab.
They got slim pickings because all the intel was gone.
But they do get, like I said, there were people that were still working there. There's still people that are kind of no longer really part of the Order of the Golden Crucible as far as anybody outside the city is concerned. But they still have that knowledge, that expertise. And I imagine that what happens is there's a lot more Menoth's Fury getting made in those labs than was the case before. A little bit less ammo, a little bit more things that burn you. But all of that,
like fire.
All that kind of speaks to this sort of interesting mix that we have with the Order of the Golden Crucible, where after their headquarters got taken over, King Baird shows up, and he's the King of Ord. And we've shown him as being kind of one of our most shrewd sovereigns in the setting. He's somebody who his kingdom is poor, resource poor. They've never been a major player on the world stage, but he's really smart, and he's able to kind of make things work for him.
Well, that's kind of what happens though when you build a giant, heavily armed wall to separate you from everybody else.
Well, and they had to do that because one of the ideas is earlier in history, Ord used to be bigger, and Khador took the northern part of it. They basically took as much as they could up to this wall of hills and Midfast, where basically they couldn't take any more. And so we've kind of set it up to where Ord is this sort of tenacious, kingdom that has a strong army, but it's not very technologically sophisticated. You've got like these soldiers that are respected, they fight really hard, they're really good in a defensive fight, but they don't have that ability to kind of like project their military abroad. They don't have a lot of warcasters, they're kind of limited on warjacks, they rely on big, huge cannons.
Well, they need to tax more because they've got that super wealthy port city that they're not taking advantage of. They can
they're doing what they can, but the idea is that they're kind of lacking in some of the technology, and so what happened is one of the avenues that Baird has taken is opening it up to mercenaries. Like one of the reasons why a lot of our mercenaries that we talk about are hanging out in Ord is because it's a great place for them to live. It's like, this is a kingdom that's ostensibly neutral to all the great wars that are going on elsewhere. You set up your headquarters there, and then you can fight wherever you want. And and that kind of helps protect Ord too. They've got all these, high-end military mercenaries that have reasons not to want to see Ord fall. And similarly, after the Order of the Golden Crucible got shattered, King Baird, goes up to the higher members and says, "Hey, I've got some real estate in Midfast, one of the most protected cities. It's just like the one in Laren that you got used to.
We'll hook you up.
We'll hook you up. We'll give you a place to live. You can set up your labs. But it'd be good if you could work on some munitions and cannons and warjacks for us."
Yeah, grease my palms.
And so the idea is it was a really good arrangement for both sides. And so they convinced the Order of the Golden Crucible to set up shop in Midfast. And so now they're an Ordic organization, but that still has a lot of former Laelese leaders. Like, there's still a lot of people who wish that Lael was not taken over by the Protectorate and Khador, but meanwhile, they've got a good setup in Ord, and like I talked about before, I think this was almost like a renaissance for your mad scientists.
They missed the tiki bar that they built in their backyard.
Yeah. Well, there were a lot of fun perks in Lael. You had a lot of dueling nobles, strangling each other in throne rooms. You had you had a lot of opportunities, especially if you're a gunman. Like the old setup in Lael, if you were a pistolier, was pretty nice. Like the nobles were always fighting with each other, lots of work.
Amethyst Rose, baby.
Yeah, the Amethyst Rose. You got your gun mages. Yeah, like this piece of art, which is another one that Mike helped us make for Kings, Nations, and Gods, is one of my favorites. I can't remember the specific king, but I think this is a noble who's choking out one of the kings of Lael.
Yeah, and everybody's just kind of watching.
They're like, "Oh, that's
is it Tuesday again?"
That's unfortunate.
Very well. Carry on.
I guess we need a new king now.
Good form.
So Lael was not a strong kingdom. It didn't. It was, but it had a lot of commercial opportunities. Ord is a stronger kingdom, one that serves to foster a new Order of the Golden Crucible, and especially a new Crucible Guard. And I just really like the notion that these beleaguered mad scientists in the Order of the Golden Crucible who have been working on all these crazy side projects and kind of been looked down upon by their peers, like all of a sudden now you've got an avenue. It's so I hear you've been working on some kind of juice that will turn somebody into a warcaster. I'm interested in that.
Yeah, so tell me more.
That seems like something we should do.
For the record, I studied genetics, chemistry, and all that kind of fun stuff late in high school and early in college, and at no point was I ever able to get skulls in my smoke.
Skull, yeah.
Is that like an old Orgoth trick?
Little faces in your smoke is probably not good for you. Like, that's a sign
It's also a little Looney Tunes.
But to my mind, there's a lot of things that happen in the Iron Kingdoms that I know, their medical science hasn't quite advanced to that level, but they're causing cancer. Like, this is pure pure cancer smoke.
Yep.
You got when there's little screaming skulls coming out of your
when
flask.
Your life expectancy is maybe 35-ish.
She doesn't have a protective. She doesn't have a protective mask on. She's not I don't know.
Yeah,
this is not safe lab practices.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like they've got an MSDS and personal protective gear, sheet sitting over there, somebody checking, making sure, did you take off all your jewelry before you started doing this?
And I think some of our alchemists are a little bit more practical. We do show them, a lot of times they're kind of geared up. They've got the full face mask on. They've got the breathing apparatus. They've got the heavy, the heavy chest plates. You want to cover up as much skin as possible because you're dealing with all these corrosive substances.
Acid is bad.
Safety is important. important.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, like if you're going to be a proper mad scientist
You gotta
who's
take
going to get
risks.
stuff done, you got to take risks. Sometimes you have to experiment on yourself or your wife and subject them to serums, like, especially if there's Kadoran spies, knocking on the door, wanting to have your Warcaster serum so they
Yeah,
can
can we
make
come
us a
check in the
bunch of
basement?
Warcasters,
No.
That's the times when you're like, sometimes if you're Alice Demore, you're like, there's a giant needle syringe on the desk that hasn't been tested yet. You're like, you know what? I think I'm just going to inject myself with that.
It's Tuesday. I've had a couple of cocktails. Let's do this.
Let's do this. Yeah, exactly. So the whole idea of the Crucible Guard kind of coming into its own is really tied into that whole dynamic of being taken in by Ord, being given the liberty to work on weapons and to where you're not just stuck making blasting powder in the basement all the time.
I say they're talking about Ord up there and the military and other warjacks. So like the Toros kind of.
Yeah,
That's a thing.
the Toro. Yeah, there's definitely Ord has its own warjacks. It does have warcasters. It's just compared to the superpowers, Khador and Signar, they couldn't quite compete. And so the idea is they were always struggling a little bit. Like we set it up to where like the Fraternal Order of Wizardry, which is another sort of international arcane organization that has expertise in cortex manufacture, they have branches in Ord too. So if you're getting Steamjack Cortexes in Ord, you're going through the Fraternal Order. But they charge a lot, and they're a pain.
Quality is not cheap.
Yeah, and so once again, like bringing the Golden Crucible into Ord, and especially when their headquarters are there and they are relying on the king to exist, suddenly you have another source of warjack engineering, of cortex expertise. Maybe you can do some weird experiments with like an alchemical arc node or whatever. And so you can kind of push the bounds a little bit with your technology. Instead of just being like, all we're doing is focusing on quality blasting powder and making sure that we stamp out any of our competitors. Now we're actually a true military, complex.
Yep.
And so that's kind of what we set up there in Midfast, and like I said, it works to Ord's advantage too. Like, because one of the things I think is kind of interesting just to think about is like we talk about Ord opening its coffers to the Golden Crucible, but I think it was that honestly the Ord of the Golden Crucible was richer than the Ordic treasury. So it's more that like the king is giving them a place and the sponsorship and the freedom to explore this weapons technology, and he doesn't have to actually pay that much for it.
Yeah, well, the money goes back into the economy.
Yeah, exactly.
So
It's good for the economy. Get lots of jobs, making weird.
everybody
tank
knows war's
things.
good for
Do
the economy.
you
right?
want to talk a little bit about the railless
Oh, the
interceptor?
railless interceptor.
This thing is pretty exciting to see hit the table. Like I honestly never thought that Matt Wilson would let us have tanks in the IK. It's like nobody's supposed to have like wheels or vehicles, but here we've got it. Well, we have had trains, and so I think that's sort of the idea
Train
behind
tracks. I mean, more like treads.
Sure,
but
sure.
Tracked vehicles.
But I mean, that's kind of the whole source of this thing, right? Is like we do at least have trains. That's one place where wheels are allowed. And
Yes.
and somebody had the bright idea, like, what if we had a train, but it doesn't have to stay on a track?
Like, how do we make this work?
Yeah, exactly.
And also make it a reasonable size.
A reasonable size is, I think, debatable.
Yeah, just a bit. And then we're going to throw a Warcaster in it. and
Sure.
Have some fun, and we're going to, do two different variants. When this stuff was going about, it was just grabbing a whole bunch of old train reference from, I went from the early 1800s and grabbed a lot of stuff that was more heavily influenced by Art Deco aesthetics.
Right.
Just kind of seeing where we can kind of like blur the lines, and then we just ended up going like full on just gritty tech.
Right.
It's like, let's just make this thing functional, look like a train, and also be able to, lay waste to a bunch of stuff on a battlefield.
Well, and I like it because, to me, it accomplishes what I always would have wanted.
Yes,
like
the
I
wheels
said,
are wide. They're not little.
But like I never would have wanted sort of the traditional tank, in the IK. Like it needs to feel like it comes out of this setting where we've got these giant, crazy warjacks, that are our premier battlefield soldier. You want something that feels more like a crazy engineer put it together. And I think from a background note, the character that's the Warcaster, which is Captain Ira McKay.
Oh, I always thought it was Ira.
Ira.
Yeah.
So we're still feeling our way through these characters, kind of developing their backgrounds. But from what I understand, her father was the inventor of the railless interceptor, and so
Probably kit bash that thing in a garage.
sure,
You know?
yeah,
Like,
a
I got
small
this
little
leftover train
version.
here, and I got some parts. Let's
Made a little version.
let's make some magic.
Yeah, but yeah, so she's kind of was almost kind of raised into this tradition of like, here, let's take advantage of this new type of military hardware and put it out into the field. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about the Crucible Guard as we're kind of moving into it is these characters that have been developed for it. And there's a couple characters that, like I said, are kind of rooted back into that Lealese origins, who are patriots who would like to see Lael restored, which kind of plays into some of the recent events in the plot, like in Aaron Rudel's Acts of War series. We've been seeing all of a sudden Signar going back into Lael to try to reclaim it, and there's a new princess, the last heir of the Lealese royal line, that has come to the fore. And so the idea, for a little while, it seemed like the Lealese resistance was doomed, like that there's pretty much no hope. But with Signar kind of going back in there hardcore, you have more of an opportunity for Lael to potentially be restored. And so you have this sort of mixed priorities among the Crucible Guard. Like, you've got some of our casters are from Ord or from Signar. They're not necessarily all interested in that. But somebody like the I'm trying to see what his official title is. Aurum Omnis, or I'm sorry, wait, where is he? Aurum Legate Lucas de More, for example, is a warcaster who is also, we introduce him a little bit in the fiction in that Fire and Forge #3, but he also showed up in Aftershock by Aaron Rudell. And this guy is a Lealese patriot. Like, the whole reason why he was willing to kind of take the risk of experimenting on himself was because he knows that times are desperate, and if he's going to try to fight against these invaders of his kingdom, he needs to do whatever it takes.
Yeah, so first we have a question from Brandon. He said,
sure.
Is there magic involved in the railless operation? I don't know. I would say that there's always magic involved on some level when you're dealing with crazy scale.
Well, one of the notions with a lot of our Mechanica is some of it is more reliant on magic than others. You have something like some of the Signar and Storm tech is much more sort of arcane feeling. You've got all that, almost seems like infinite power source with these storm chambers that Nemo came up with. There's not a lot of science behind the storm chamber, but something
you get, like, convergent stuff. It's
Right.
floating robots.
Floating robots.
Like-
There's, and that's relying on some ley line energies. Like, they look at it as scientific, but it's based on a implausible premise, which is these energy flows that they can tap into.
Yep.
So something like the railless interceptor is a little bit more on the engineering side. So there's definitely probably mechanical components in there to make it work, but it's not as reliant on that as some of the other things. Warjacks are the same way. Like, Warjacks are normal steam powered, like Laborjack is not something that's using a lot of magic. It has a crazy magic brain, the Cortex, but the body itself is powered by a steam engine and by burning coal.
And some pretty impressive metal to be able to support that upper
Well,
torso.
yeah, there's definitely some physics issues in theory, but
Looks cool.
But and that's one of the things that we do with both Mechanica and alchemy in general. Is alchemy and Mechanica allow us to bend the rules on physics and metallurgy.
I can't even imagine what the PSI is on some of the hydraulics and
Yeah,
those things to get
yeah,
them
the
to work.
hydraulics, the pistons.
You get one of those lines to
Like,
break,
especially
people die.
Those little waist pistons like on the ironclad. Like, that has to be some pretty heavy duty.
We should just
alloys.
start adding labels to things, like blast area,
exactly.
keep at least 10 feet away in
Yeah,
case
there's-
of...
There's a lot of torque tension going on in some of that material. But so the basic conceit is we're able to do something that feels science fictional, that feels beyond the bounds of even what technology we have through magic. But fundamentally, there's still a lot of engineering involved. There's there's pistons, there's gears, there's an engine that's burning coal, and so I think
Well, that's also something that we take into account whenever we're designing something too.
Right.
Is like the best visual design is usually rooted in real world objects. So whenever you're deconstructing a warjack, you're trying to figure out like, okay, so if this piston moves this way, or your hydraulic actuator arm goes this way, then what's your counter action? And then reverse engineering it so that way there at least is some practical functionality to it.
Right.
And then shoulder pads notwithstanding.
And to me, like one of the most basic fundamental comparisons I've liked to make is with something like Magnus's sword. If you think about it, a sword is a piece of technology. It has a sharp edge that divides something.
Oh, that's some cloud stripe stuff, though. I mean,
and you can use mechanica to augment that. Like if the sword wasn't sharp, it would be harder to make a mechanical sword that could cut even better. And so the idea is that maybe you have a cool, heavy, weighty sword that also has some kind of like an energy that's projected along the edge to add to the cutting strength, to keep it intact so that it doesn't break as easily. So you still have that fundamental mechanical property that's being enhanced by the magic.
I kind of wonder how much that would set back a society, honestly. If you were to rely so heavily upon something like that, I mean, it's going to prevent you from developing things like nanofilaments and
and that's something that we've embraced full-heartedly, is the idea that technology doesn't necessarily advance in the Iron Kingdom super fast. Like we do have occasional advances, like we're even seeing some in the Crucible Guard.
V Mythos,
sure,
that might be a thing.
Yes. And technology advances in weird ways, but you definitely find situations where people kind of fall into a rut, or you just rely on what works. And so, you could say that about warjacks in general. Like the warjacks work, it's just a matter of kind of expanding on them. And then we've just started to see, different power sources and so on. What are we looking at here?
You covered it up, John.
All right. LuckGod84 says, I have a question from Riker's Iron, who couldn't make it today. He asks, with the Iron Kingdom's universe expanding quicker than ever with new factions each year, how's the team planning on including the less explored regions of the world? Zoo, for example.
Oh, man.
Well, I can't really get into that.
We kind of got to start touching upon Zoo a bit in Prime.
And we've been
was fun.
We've been pushing a little bit that way in a couple of directions. Like we had some no quarter material touching on Zoo. The notion is there is trade happening with Zoo. There is contact. There's sort of the city of Conesta, which is a port city where
a bazaar.
Yeah, it's like a bazaar. We kind of set it up to where like there's a narrow point of entry into Zoo. The Zooies don't much want Immerese mucking around through their continent, and so
not yet.
Not yet. So there's one place where you're allowed to go, but we're starting to see kind of a little bit of an expansion on that. We have Signarin and Kadoran outposts that have been established in Zoo. We have Mercarian League, which has an interest there. That's attracted pirates that are going down there. We had, I think, in the last of the pirate novels, we had a little bit of contact with Zoo, and so it's one of those things we're kind of dabbling into, but we haven't gone full bore into it yet. And there's definitely a lot of material that we could develop for Zoo. There's a lot of
I say, trust me, visually, I would love to go to Zoo, because that means that I get to do a lot of fun exploration.
Right.
And when we started just touching upon it, I was bummed that we weren't doing another one immediately afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's only so much space inside of the issue too. So.
Right, and one of the things as we kind of expand the world, we also want to keep some degree of mystery too. And so even as we kind of start to explore places like Zoo, or there's the Alkier subcontinent, which is just a little bit to the southeast of the Iron Kingdoms, there's places that we're starting to venture into, but there's still a lot of uncertainties, a lot of unknowns, plenty of things that could emerge from those places that you haven't seen yet.
So Seth asks, could a warjack have two full cortexes in it with separate personalities? that sounds like a really bad idea.
I'm sure some mad scientist somewhere will try it.
Yeah, well, I'm also picturing the scene from RoboCop 2 when all those failed experiments happen. The guy just walks out and
That's how you get the Sturm and Drang Warjack, and nobody wants that. So
trying to rip their own heads off.
right, but yeah, like I think, you know, it's impossible to know exactly what kind of crazy thing we might do next. But like, to me, something like a
I
jack
could
with 2 cortexes.
Tell you what we're doing next.
Well,
but we can't.
But I'm just saying, like I would never want to say an absolute like a warjack can only have 1 cortex, because we've already shown with things like the behemoth that there's subcortexes that you could allocate to certain systems. But to some degree, it's a matter of whether something's a good idea, if there's an advantage to having it, or if you have the right crazy mad scientist that's gonna exploit that, you know, for their benefit. Like
I say Karchev too.
well, and we've seen stuff almost like that with Crix, where, you know, there's a couple of the Crixian Helljacks that have, you know,
And no, that's not confirmed.
they have like soul matrices inside them that are like affecting their behavior, and so you almost do have this kind of pull between what the cortex is trying to do versus, you know, they're basically like haunted jacks, and that causes
Here, let's put a crazy spirit inside of this
it
thing and
causes
let it loose.
problems from one perspective. Like, let's say you're a dock worker and you're relying on your steam jack to move boxes from A to B. Having a haunted steam jack, not a good thing.
That sounds, like the, start, that sounds like the start of a Scooby-Doo
if you're a
episode.
Crixian necromancer who wants to murder as many things as possible, and you're okay with like letting Helljacks loose on the mainland, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah,
So
you just stand back.
it just depends on what your goals are. Let's see, we got some more OGC questions. Dorian wants to know, OGC, is it a council guild with guild master? It's basically like a craft guild. The last, I think it was, let me see here, I think I've got it in my notes. I think it was Orem, the last leader of the Laolese Order of the Golden Crucible was Orem Magnus Wise, and he got killed rather unceremoniously when the Khadorans took over. There are new leaders that have emerged since the order was put back together. I think currently in charge of the military side of things, Orem Legate Lucas de More is sort of considered to be in charge of the Crucible Guard. So the Crucible Guard has evolved from being just sort of these escorts into its own sort of army, and so they've started to kind of, it's still sort of a work in process where they're becoming a little bit more structured. They've kind of invented some new ranks. They've expanded beyond kind of the needs that they had when they were just sort of a glorified bodyguard service for the alchemists. And so we're starting to see kind of more of a military hierarchy in the Crucible Guard. And so the Crucible Guard is kind of becoming its own little standalone thing. But there's still the Order of the Golden Crucible that's kind of back in the labs working on the projects, and there are some leaders in charge of that. I don't have all the info at my fingertips, but there's basically multiple senior alchemists, some of whom were pretty important in the old organization, some of which are new, that are in charge of the overall organization. But in terms of warcasters, unless I'm mistaken, I think that Lucas de More is basically kind of currently the top dog.
Cool.
But then we also have Marshal General Baldwin Gearhart, who's one of my favorite of the new characters.
He's fun.
Do you have a piece of art on him back over there? So Gearhart is
Jerk.
he's eccentric.
Here,
like,
carry this.
he's got a
And this, and
he
this, and
basically
this, and this.
He's not so much a researcher or an alchemist. He doesn't represent the cerebral side
Oh, yeah.
of the order so much as
He's a blunt instrument.
once you
He looks like the kind of guy that like responds to everything with "ha ha."
yes. Well, yeah,
I
well,
have a giant bazooka.
once you have the cool toys, you will have a warcaster emerge who enjoys using them. And nobody enjoys
he has
using
all the toys.
Nobody enjoys using the cool toys more than Gearhart. So he's all about like, give me the explosive whatever. I don't care how it works. You know, don't tell me about all the fiddly pieces. Just tell me how I pull the trigger and let me go try it out.
He's like the non-clever James Bond.
Yes. Yeah.
He just hangs out with Q all
He
day.
gets the gear, goes out in the field, blows people up. Now, that's not to say he isn't a good military commander, but he is very eccentric. He's sort of, I imagine him as kind of approaching the battlefield somewhat like a big game hunter would, with his entourage. So he's seeing this as an opportunity to try out his weapons more than I need to achieve X, Y, or Z for the betterment of the Order of the Golden Crucible, or to restore Lael, blah, blah, blah. He's just like, I just want the cool guns, and please hand me the one I haven't tried yet.
Oh, Mr. Clark, pass me the catalytic mess maker.
Exactly.
So Kensei asked, he said, why are the CG designs like a fusion of Signar and Khador? So I'm not really seeing that so much, but whenever you have whenever you're doing visual design exploration, one of the things that you always go through process-wise is you're looking at what already exists, right? And then when you say, okay, the Toro is a part of this, which we have an established design for,
right,
then you already have your baseline for how something looks. And since those were all designed around the same time as Signar and Khador and Jax.
There's some interesting distinctions with something like the Toro. Like the Toro is actually one of the oldest Warjack designs in the setting because it was on the character guide, to begin with. And so that was like one of the first sort of big Warjacks that Matt Wilson created. And I think he was kind of exploring some of the visual aesthetics when he was doing it. And so it has some of those kind of curved elements that are similar to Signar. And a lot of that ties into the lore pretty well too, because Ordic Warjack design, it would make sense that they would be drawing from Signar and Khadoran references there, especially Signar, and they've had close relationships with Signar for a long time. And Signar has occasionally donated like old outmoded Warjacks to Ord to help out with their military, because it's always been to Signar's interest that Ord remain strong, because Khador is always waiting there on the north trying to come through. Like if Ord were to fall, that's another border area that Signar would have to worry about.
Yeah, but one thing you would notice though too is that if you look at your basic infantry for OGC, the way that those guys look, they don't look like trenchers.
No,
they don't look like they would be able to just like get pushed right in with the rest of the Signaran army, unless it was like a merc addition. But
I think there's real good reasons with the other thing that's kind of fun to think about with Ord is like their northern border. We've set it up where like Boarsgate, for example, Boarsgate's one of the strongest fortresses on Ord's northern border. That is where Khador sends like their journeyman warcasters to train. So Khador is constantly sending military hardware against Northern Ord just so people can have practice. And so Ord has been dealing with Khador's nonsense for a long time, for hundreds of years. And so when they're approaching their own Jack designs, they know they're going to be dealing with threats like Khador. They're going to borrow from some things that work there. They've also had to deal with some similar issues with some of the rarity and some of the rare materials for cortexes. And so having the occasional durable Jack makes sense. There are some in-setting reasons why there's some similarities, even though I do think they have their own unique look.
Yeah, they've got their look. It's always one of those things, though, is even when you're designing real-world tech, real-world tech comes from something that already works. Like, you're not going to re-engineer the airplane because you think fixed wing and rotary wing doesn't work, so let's just do something completely
Unless
different.
You're a crazy mad scientist.
Yeah, and
which happens every now and then.
Yeah, and then you run out of money real quick.
And then you make a rocket man or whatever.
And throw it in a Tesla.
Was there another question on there? Let's see. Gromril Fist asks, how alchemically similar are Elise's Berserker juices to the Warpwolf potions of the Circle of Boros? That is a very good question that has not been properly analyzed yet. We're going to need to have serums delivered to Midfast for some analysis. There could be some similarities. There could be some cross or some parallel evolution going on.
There's just a bunch of them just like chained up somewhere and they're reverse engineering.
Yeah, we haven't had a chance to delve into that too much. I don't think there were too many Warpwolves harmed in the development of the serum, but I wouldn't rule out the possibility.
Cool.
I guess we're about out of time. It's been really fun sitting here and rambling on with you guys. Hopefully they'll let us take over again at some point.
And maybe there's another show they take everybody.
Yeah.
But thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and let us know what you'd like to see. Join in every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 10 a.m. To hang out with us as we play some games, paint, or talk about what's going on in the world of privateer press games.
And remember that you can hang out with PP staff at Adepticon this weekend if you're in the vicinity.
And pick up the awesome Sorsha bust or the Rocket Girl Rider.
Or both.
Well, yeah, both. Just do both.
Right. And make sure to head to pplockandload.com today at 1 p.m. Pacific to register for events, get tickets and hotel space if you still need them. So see you next time, and take care, everybody.
Take care, folks.
All right. I really do like the railless interceptor. Like I said, I was skeptical of tanks.
I didn't know how we were going to make it work. It was very much one of those, once we started doing sketches and